Turning to our special report, the facts on political violence. The U.S. faces a major problem with attacks on political leaders. We've recently lived through assassinations, assassination attempts, and other attacks on elected officials.
We have seen over the last 8 or 10 years this proliferation of political violence against members of both parties.
Politically motivated violence is wrong.
We must condemn political violence in all its form, in all its twisted motivations and perverse ideologies.
Elected officials facing attacks in the past few years, from President Trump to Speaker Pelosi's family to Governor Shapiro. After the recent killing of Republican Charlie Kirk, there were swift, strong claims about this type of violence and what led to it and how to respond. Assessing this grave problem requires evidence, facts, and detail, while also patrolling against partisan bias, which can be very hard when some of the crimes here are political, designed to incite, plus the emotions running high, understandably. Our report now documents the actual motives in recent violence, as determined by law enforcement. Now, for anyone craving a simple binary story about only one side's blame, you're not going to find it here in the facts or the sometimes vague motives, as reviewed by investigators. Across history, we know U.S. political violence has ebbed and flowed over time, spikes during periods of unrest. The trends have sometimes shown ideological bents. Political violence surged starting in the late 1960s, Reuters reports. By the early 70s, that violence was perpetuated more often by radicals on the left. The radical groups doing the largest number of political attacks were coming from the fringe left, driving mostly left-wing violence, focused on destroying property like government buildings. And that era was upended by the assassinations of leaders across the spectrum, attempted or executed assassinations. That type of violence actually waned in the 80s, then came back with some right-wing anti-government violence in the 90s, the Oklahoma City bombing, killing 168 people, the deadliest act of domestic terror perpetuated by two U.S.-born terrorists. The FBI finding they were motivated by anti-government militia-aligned views. Now, in the decades since, right-wing violence is increasing. And so here are the facts for the current and our recent era. Right-wing and anti-government violence is the most common political violence. It is also the most deadly. Over the past 3 decades, far-right extremists led 220 attacks compared to far-left extremists leading 42 attacks. That's roughly 5 times as by the far right. And if you look at the body count, as investigators do, those attacks resulting in far-right extremist violence leading to about or over 520 deaths. The left-wing attacks resulting in the death of about the number you see there, 78. That's 6 times as many dead. A federal government accounting shows the number of far-right attacks outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. This was explained to Congress by the first person Trump appointed to permanently lead the FBI, Chris Wray, testifying under oath in 2019 about far-right and racist acts. He explained that most of the FBI's domestic terror cases involved white supremacist motives.
A majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence.
Those are the facts on the motives. If it sounds different than some of what you've heard lately or ever, if it sounds different than what the government is saying now, that's because, in part, the Trump administration has officials trying to disappear those facts. Literally. Under A.G. Bondi, the DOJ removed the factual study on far-right extremists committing, quote, far more violence than the left in this current era. Investigative reporter Jason Palladino discovering that change just days after Charlie Kirk was killed. Now, the administration is also undercutting the work that tracks domestic terror and hate crimes, which is odd if you want to know the facts to deal with them. That's the current government's effort. But hiding that kind of report does not hide the facts. And as Trump's FBI director testified, a majority of this coming from white supremacist violence. Numbers showing more deadly right-wing terror. there are also cases that do not fall neatly into one clear motive at all. We are going to show you a chart for the recent probes of major incidents of political violence. Right now, you see it's blank. We're going to show you what authorities found about each motive. Two major extremist shootings in 15 and 16, where Islamic terror motivated those shooters. The killer of 49 at Pulse nightclub also had ties to Islamist groups, but authorities didn't find a determined motive. The killer of 5 Dallas officers had the motive of killing white officers. The FBI found the shooter of Republican lawmakers on a baseball field was motivated by domestic violent extremism and had posted anti-Trump messages online. The DOJ found the Charlottesville killer was a white supremacist committing hate-inspired act of domestic terror. Authorities also found terror and inciting fear, the motive of the person mailing bombs to Democrats and Trump critics. DOJ found a white supremacist had anti-Semitic motives in killing 11 at a Pittsburgh synagogue, and a white supremacist who attacked that El Paso Walmart. It was anti-government motives for the kidnapping plot against Governor Whitmer, a Democrat. Then, I'm moving through this fairly swiftly, the most wide-scale incident of political violence in a single day in decades was, of course, the people convicted of storming the Capitol after Trump summoned them to D.C. on January 6, 21. Mitch McConnell called it an insurrection that very night. DOJ determined the core motive was political violence, using force to oppose the lawful transfer of power. Trump freed the convicted on that day, those convicted for what they did that day. And I will return to that because it's relevant. But here in our chart, I want to show you the white supremacist shooter and attacker that was seeking to punish Pelosi. That's one. And above it, the Buffalo supermarket attack was terror targeting black people. The attempted assassination of Trump last year came with a shooter with a mixed background. The FBI found that he searched for Trump and Biden before the attack. And while the attempt is terrible, the FBI's probe has complicated the potential motive, and thus authorities say it actually remains undetermined. This year, an arsonist targeted Democratic Governor Shapiro's house, citing Gaza. A shooter killed 2 Minnesota Democrats, and like the Trump shooter probe, note authorities have not determined a clear motive there. And that is the same status in the probe of Charlie Kirk's assassin. It's very early in that case. Politicians have spoken out, but law enforcement has not finalized a determined motive. The shooter's text said he had enough of what he viewed as Kirk's, quote, hate, unquote. Tracking these incidents shows how the violence varies and can be complicated. And as I showed you, remember, the motives for some attacks are undetermined by the authorities. That's what the people investigating are able to determine, a contrast to many rushing to assume or declare motives, sometimes within hours of an incident. Some attacks on politicians may not be political violence at all. Now, let me explain by sourcing one of the U.S. government's terror experts, former CIA advisor Bruce Hoffman, who's written books on this and notes that criminals pursuing political violence or terror are, quote, different from the lunatic assassin who may seek the same objective, the death of a political figure. The terrorist goal is political, to change a political system through the violence, while the lunatic assassin's goal, he writes, is, quote, more often egocentric and personal. Hinckley, who tried to kill Reagan in '81 to impress Jodie Foster, acted not from a political motivation, but to impress his screen idol. That is one well-known and extreme example, Hoffman warning against simply misinterpreting the motive of some acts, and also against allowing those would-be violent extremists or terrorists to try to determine our choices or our priorities. And the data shows the recent attacks, I just walked through them with you, also seem to reinforce those trends the FBI found. The right-wing and white supremacist violence is the top threat numerically. Those are the facts. I just walked you through it in brief. We've done a lot of research and citations to get there. Now I want to turn to the second part, and it's the one you may know pretty well from recent political discourse. I want to turn to the elected leaders' reactions to this varied mix of violence. Sometimes top officials are united in condemning it. President Trump and many Republicans condemned the killing of those Minnesota Democrats I mentioned, as did Democratic leaders. National party leaders have rebuked the attempted assassinations of Donald Trump. A few local Democratic officials posted baseless questions about whether that shooting was staged or undercutting, quote, sympathy for Trump, which drew criticism for minimizing that terrible attempted assassination. Now, there were 2 assassination attempts made against Trump. National Democratic leaders were clear about condemning the violence at the time. I can show you that right now.
There is no, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, those of you who know me, many of you do, no place in political violence for political violence in America. None. Zero. Never.
I checked on him to see if he was okay. I told him what I have said publicly. There's no place for political violence in our country.
No place. National leaders there on that subject, both parties, clear on that attempted violence against Trump, that it was wrong, has no place, no defense of any kind. And I've shown you these facts. I walked you through them. I want to use that as the context because while I know that there are, of course, strong feelings about all of this, understandably so, we have to deal in reality. And while there was those universal condemnations of what I just showed you, President Trump, factually, does not always join in condemning that political violence. And it's a very specific time and example when he doesn't. It is when it is against his opponents in America. That is a major change from the very top. Trump has responded to this kind of violence by minimizing it or claiming to, quote, joke about it, and sometimes outright defending it. And other Republicans, some of them, have appeared to follow that lead.
Crazy Nancy Pelosi. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know?
Lawmakers are reacting to the arson at the governor's mansion, including Representative Dan Mueser.
On a podcast, Mueser condemned the suspect's actions, but also appeared to put some of the blame on Governor Shapiro for the arson attack.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides. The sting that they did involving Gretchen Whitmer was fake.
Backlash is growing over Utah Senator Mike Lee apparently posting jokes to his social media about the assassination of a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband.
The plot against Governor Whitmer was real, not fake, as was the assassination that Senator Lee joked about. Very real, 2 people murdered. And the attack on the Pelosi household that Trump referenced, real. So there have been some recent calls to tone down rhetoric, the words that might minimize or launder actual violence against political leaders, though, what you just heard, for example, from Donald Trump, would be the first clear place to start. And those are just words. The other shift on this long road of political violence in America is the way from the top we are seeing some of it legitimized. A top political leader or a president legitimizing politicized violence is a very big deal. This has been in our face since January 6, 2021. The first break in America's peaceful transfer of power, a convicted sedition, now, for the first time this year, embraced and rewarded by a sitting president. This January, Trump's VP, J.D. Vance, was still publicly opposing freeing people convicted of political violence against police on January 6. Vance said, if you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned.
Obviously. Because that pardon rewards the violence. Violence which the DOJ determined, as we showed you here in the motive, was to stop the transfer of power, to hijack or seditiously interfere with who runs your government through violence, political violence. But just this year, even though Vance said that, Donald Trump pardoned those very convicts after touting them as special, starting on the very first day of their insurrection and sedition.
We love you. You're very special. They were warriors, but they were really more than anything else. They're victims of what happened. They ought to release the J6 hostages. It will be my great honor to pardon the peaceful January 6 protesters.
169 of them have pleaded guilty to assaulting police officers.
Because they had no choice.
900 pleaded guilty to other crimes. They're also going to be eligible for a pardon from you?
Listen, it's a very tough system. We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
You won't stop political violence by rewarding it. You have to punish it to deter it. That's how the law works. Justice requires punishing crimes regardless of who the crimes or violence may target or even benefit. That's why the Roman statue of Lady Justice is famously blindfolded. That's why some of this shouldn't even need to be said in a society based on the rule of law if we still intend to be. It's the fundamental baseline of the law. So political partisans lecturing people about toning down words or rhetoric right now, attempting to claim that ground without even punishing the actual violence in our midst, condemning it, well, that is as illogical as hiding the facts about the documented violence. And to counter this political violence, we need the facts, we need to be honest, and we obviously need to punish the convicted violence, not reward it.